You're about to enter a new dimension where boundaries of life sciences, data, and technology blur, and AI reshapes what's possible. Welcome to the Improzone, powered by Improzo.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Improzone. I'm your host, Jane Urban, and I am so excited today to have a guest that is a first for us. This is our first partnership that we're going to be announcing. I'm joined here by Indraneel Mukherjee, who is a partner at Guidehouse. And he has just an incredible amount of expertise in the pharma space and commercial strategy, AI transformation, future of workforce and life sciences, so many things. So Indraneel, welcome.
Jane, thank you. It's both an honor and a pleasure to be here. For all our listeners, I lead Guidehouse's commercial strategy, advisory, commercial solutions practice for all of life sciences. Spent the past 2 decades working with a variety of pharmaceutical companies and advising them on all things commercialization, from upstream portfolio strategy to launch to commercial models and driving organizational transformation through structural changes, capability changes, and people-related changes. And a lot of my career has been in the trenches of seeing my own advice play out, both during execution and frankly, that has been the most humbling part of my career where I've learned probably the most. So in that journey, I've had to go through my own personal S-curves, if you will, in the first becoming data literate and then becoming data science literate and now AI literate, if that's a thing, to ensure that the work that I do with my clients and my colleagues are always quote unquote future fit.
That is awesome. And honestly, that's part of the joy and excitement of that kind of advisory work. So one thing I have to say for the record at the top of any of these conversations is that we're here to talk about our own personal reflections, our own views, our own experiences. We're not necessarily speaking on behalf of any organization, current, past, whatever, in any official capacity. And so I just want to make sure that we officially say that Indraneel does not have to personally represent all of Guidehouse in what he's saying. It's just the two of us talking about what it's been like to be in the trenches. So hopefully that works for you, Indraneel.
Absolutely. All opinions are my own and not Guidehouse's official position.
There you go. That's how we do these podcasts these days. So before we get into the real meat of the topic, I want to just acknowledge a moment that's brought us into this conversation. So Improzo and Guidehouse have been chatting about how maybe we could work together. And I think we've actually landed on something that is just really makes a ton of sense. Can you share a little bit more about how we're partnering from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, I think of this as a perfect marriage, if any of that exists, really. You know, what Guidehouse does, it brings decades of advisory and research depth combined with a lot of execution capability. Across all our clients, which is mostly brand and commercial leaders, they routinely turn to us and seek our advice to solve the hardest problems that are keeping them up at night and provide them with very clear tactical direction in some cases on how to extract value from our recommendations. Historically, that's where we have stopped because we are an advisory first firm. So exactly one step before the value realization, which happens in the trenches of execution. But we recognize that pharma clients need both strategic clarity as well as the ability to actually get things built and deployed and done not in the 20th century way, but in the day and age of AI. So we do the market research, for example. We bring the analytical rigor and we bring the organizational change lens. This is where our partnership with Improzo is helpful because Improzo brings in the AI accelerators and the implementation arm. And together, what we are able to do is what, frankly, either of us would not have been able to do individually, which is question the status quo on everything. Just because a certain thing has been done a certain way in the past, that doesn't mean that has to be done exactly the same way in the future. So working with Improzo would allow us to essentially show our clients just exactly how AI can change the way ideas are generated, how AI can pressure test those ideas and implement and essentially realize value.
That's awesome. And it's funny because I think that's exactly how I've always seen it too. When we talk about how Improzo engages, we're talking about this gap between insights and learning and advisory sort of work and the execution of that work. And I think our whole thesis is that we've already, as an industry, invested a lot in platforms and analytics. And the problem probably is not going to be solved with more data or more strategy per se. It's about getting stuff done. And that execution, last mile execution is a phrase I often say. And that's where we can use so much of the strategic framing to get to that right place to do that last mile of execution, which we are expressly not an advisory firm. I mean, obviously we'll talk to folks, we communicate, we can talk about things, but we're mostly want to do things. So we're very much on the other side where we want to be focused on building and shipping things. One of my pet peeves is when something is just like slideware, where it's just a bunch of PowerPoint slides and there's nothing happening beneath the hood. So I think what's so cool about this is that we really are very additive, and that, I know it's a little cliche, but that idea of a synergy, I think is a very real component of what we're trying to do. So that's something we're super, super excited about. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about what kicked off all of this conversation of us partnering together. And I think where it tends to go is this: what are companies building in-house and kind of building capabilities and owning and managing as a pharmaceutical life sciences company? And what do they want to like essentially rent from a partner like Guidehouse or Improzo, or the combination of the two? And I think this evolves, but I'm curious where you are in this time, in the June 2026 time frame when we're recording this. Where do you come down on that question right now, on the build versus buy question?
Build versus buy versus rent. I think this is
rent. Yes, exactly.
I think this is a fabulous question. I think it's not a new question, and it's been asked many times before, even in the pre-AI preponderance age. Now with AI, of course, companies are asking whether to build internal AI capability, hire data scientists, own their own models, have their forward deployed engineers, versus the reality that AI is evolving so quickly that owning yesterday's capability may not be the advantage companies think it is. So the build versus buy question is not just about cost. It's about genuinely what's strategic to own. And this is further exacerbated in my mind as many large cap pharma companies have established their own GCCs in offshore locations. GCCs, for those who don't know, are global capability centers. That's just the acronym in the million acronyms that exist in our industry, right?
And it's funny you say that, just to call that out, because I think even the acronym GCC is relatively new and evolving and changing so rapidly. We even have someone in our team who's focused specifically on GCC and how companies execute on it. So it's a new space. So yeah, that's the other trend, right?
Yes, and the pressure on pharma, both finance leadership, as well as business unit leadership, as well as AI and digital leadership, is to ensure that those GCCs are future-proof. So those companies that have gone down that path and they've built out their own GCCs, they've already chosen a path. They're already down the build path.
Yeah.
And now the question is less build versus buy, but more on either to buy to build or build to rebuild. You know where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So, and then there are those companies that have not yet made that level of investment in fixed costs. So they are really wondering, what's the right path? Which is the right path to go? And especially given the rate of change of technology, and therefore what is truly core competency? I think it boils down to that. What does a company consider to be core competency? Because that starts to dictate any future decisions down the line.
Yeah. And I think you're putting your finger on something that is definitely a challenge in this rapid space. And it's funny because I think it was always speedy, but man, AI is this whole other clip of speed, of innovation and iteration. And so I think you hire people to build capabilities, and the capability becomes almost a commodity overnight in some cases. Some of the things you're seeing happen so rapidly, whether it's Claude adds a new feature and now that whole capability doesn't make sense anymore, or it's that you have new kind of ways of doing a thing that make the older way of working obsolete, like whichever way it is. But I think the thing that's really important for life sciences companies, especially, is what are the things that you think you need to be especially good at? Where do you want to like differentiate yourself? And if that answer is AI model development, that's where you want to play, then absolutely, let's do that. But I have a feeling that's not usually what life sciences companies are saying, right? They're going to say, I want my field folks to have better information faster, to make better decisions, engage with the right people, be well informed, and operate at the highest levels. I want administrative burden to go as low as humanly possible so we can spend time doing the things that we think are critical for humans to do. All those categories, right? We're in the business of making ethical products to change and extend people's lives. That's our business, right? So that's probably not the place to invest heavily in AI. You should be thinking about it more in the context of how can I leverage these tools and technology rather than build them myself, right?
Absolutely, 100% agree. And you know what? Let me add another perspective to that. When a company decides to build anything in-house, they're also deciding on a talent strategy, whether they explicitly state that or not. Finding, developing, and not just developing, retaining that AI talent in pharma is genuinely hard.
Yeah, it's funny
Um,
because this reminds me of data science too. When we first started hiring data scientists in pharma, you learn how different the needs to keep them engaged and excited about what they're doing change. One data scientist by themselves, not going to work very well, right? There's that same learning curve with AI talent.
In fact, more because the half-life of specific AI skills is short. Data science is still a little more pervasive. If you knew how to do Bayesian latent regression, you would have probably learned that, and that model hasn't become redundant. But
Right.
AI is becoming redundant faster than it's becoming relevant. The
Yeah.
relevancy versus redundancy curve is very different. And there's an
Yeah.
enormous difference between having AI talent and having AI talent that understands the pharma operating model enough to build things that actually get used. And not
Yes.
to mention, make sure that talent is not short lived. Like, for example, let's not kid ourselves. Pharma is frankly competing with the likes of OpenAI, Anthropic, Google for the exact same talent. So if I'm a 22-year-old forward deployed engineer, that's a terminology everybody uses right now. As the 22-year-old, I have a choice of being employed by either Anthropic or by a pharma company. Let's just say, take Bristol Myers Squibb. So BMS, in my example, is not just competing with a Novartis or a Merck or an advisory consulting firms like ours or an AI native technology such as yours, but they're also competing with an Anthropic and OpenAI. So the talent strategy question is, how does my talent plan compete with each one of them? So it is an exciting time to be frankly in this business, but what it really boils down to is one who understands this at a very deep level in terms of how pharma operates, how decisions are being made, what decisions are made, by whom, when, and under what constraints, and what are the implications of those decisions. This is what separates great AI impact from AI for AI's sake.
Yeah, no, that the part you're talking about first off, just AI for AI's sake. I have lots of problems with that. But also, if you have these really brilliant techie engineers that are coming into your space and they haven't seen or felt the way that pharma has operated, it's not going to be an easy kind of partnership for those folks, because just because someone could build a new tool that does something very efficiently doesn't mean it's going to fit into the existing ways of working, workflow, compliance environment. That's one of the things that really has been a differentiator in my mind as I've talked to different clients, is this very strong fear coming from people who have a certain way of operating and engaging with FDA or whatever, to suddenly have to be thinking about where AI can fit into that same equation. And so we've had to live through those journeys and those workflows of how do we safely, explainably bring the AI technology to bear on a field rep day-to-day operations piece.
This is where we shine. This is where our partnership becomes actually very helpful. Guidehouse, we help clients think through the talent strategy piece as well as the organization design piece. Most of our clients, and no fault of theirs, but they jump straight into the use case. And that's understandable, right? There's always the pressure to show progress, and senior leaders like to call it quick wins. But in retrospective, neither is that quick, nor is it a real win.
Yeah.
In our advisory work, like, we are constantly helping our clients to ensure that they don't miss the forest for the trees. The questions that we help them with are, what capability should be owned versus partners? How do you structure these AI centers of excellence that are actually useful versus just organizational theater? The governance question around AI talent and tooling. What does the future RACI look like? Those are all the questions that we are constantly working with clients. And the good part is these questions are being asked much more seriously now versus maybe a couple of years back, where it was all into that sort of use case by use case sort of a mindset. Let's take a very common example. One of the areas where we are doing a lot of such questions, answering a lot of these questions, launch. Every mid and large cap pharma company that at least I have experienced has launch playbooks. And some launch playbooks are better than the other launch playbooks. In fact, we have helped write many of those launch playbooks. So we are looking at documents that we were once the author of.
Yeah.
Almost all of them, at least to my knowledge, were written in the pre-AI age. So the playbooks exist. There's a launch excellence framework, but all of those playbooks, frameworks, they're all pre-AI age frameworks and playbooks. So the question that now we are helping our clients think through are, how would you adapt them? How would you alter them? What would you amplify in the post-AI age? Should the same set of activities happen? Should they happen in the exact same order? Should it take the exact same time? Should the operating model and the RACI look exactly the same? Should it look different? If different, how different? How can governance, because launch governance is so important, how can governance evolve from what used to be, and in many ways still is, a committee-based, people-heavy process to more AI-driven process? How can you be grounded on facts, and not my facts versus your facts, but our facts, right? And foster better decision-making. That, to me, is advisory work in the day and age of AI applied to a problem statement that is absolutely relevant to every pharma company, aka launch.
Yeah, no, I think it's a tension. It's a very real tension. And I think there's a sort of, I've been writing about this myself, actually, this middle ground between, what do we choose? We have to now actively choose what we're going to keep human and have humans do, and human at the front of it. And then what we're going to choose to use AI to help us and augment that work. And there's an element of knowing that you need to have control over these things to a certain extent, and that you are consciously choosing those things rather than letting them happen to you. So judgment and critical thinking, which becomes, I think, one of the most important skills, full stop now, that still needs to stay with you as a company. You're going to have to make those calls and say, here's where we're going to play, here's where we're not going to play, here's how we're going to go to market. But some of the execution detail, especially, is something that you probably want to partner with, because the actual specifics of how things get done are going to shift and change. The things that might have been, because we had no other option, manual, now can be automated. And so you need sort of two things. And I think this has been the thing I've noticed, is there's almost like a baseline literacy around what AI can and cannot do that needs to be established. And it's, of course, changing rapidly. So it's hard to keep up, but that conceptually is part of it. And then they need to be able to have the folks working in the pharma company to have the ability to understand what they should be asking, what they should be worried about, what kinds of pressure testing they should apply to an AI tool. It reminds me a little bit of, I don't know how long this has been a thing, but certainly for the last 10 years, you were taught as a business person, as a non-technical person, that you should not have custom things anymore, right? Custom code, no custom builds, should be configured, right? So you say, nope, I want a configured solution. I don't want a custom solution like you were taught. That's one aspect of many now that need to be thought through with AI and how it plays with all the other tech. So that's still there, right? That whole component of how you build things. But then now you're adding in kind of, there's an LLM, where did it come from? How secure is it? All this other stuff. So I think becoming an intelligent buyer, consumer of this tech is going to be a new skill that unfortunately is going to be always catching up to where the technology is. But you don't actually need to have the depth in every realm, right? We've learned this even historically with technology, and the data engineering and the data science space can be something that you partner to do. You don't have to do it all on your own. And it may not make sense economically to do that if you don't have the kind of volume of requests or builds or things to go there yet. Maybe eventually. I think that you saw that arc with data science. It used to be that you only had a couple projects that touched that data science layer of complexity. And so having a full-time person was almost not fair to the person. Like you needed the volume to catch up. And I think that's what it did. Then you could have your pod of technical and scientific data folks. Like that, to me, I think is just a microcosm of this challenge that we're heading into with the workforce. And I know when you and I were meeting to get ready for this is where we really got deep, which is, what does the workforce look like in this new commercial model? We talked about launch plans. We're talking about different kinds of activities and changes. There's also, I could imagine, just life cycle management. So maybe you do launch in a more kind of quote unquote traditional way, but when do you make the decision to pivot to something maybe less traditional? Can you do that sooner? I think those are all good questions that people are grappling with right now. So that's like the moment when everything becomes a real activity, the rubber's hitting the road. And we talked about the capabilities themselves changing as well. So what are you seeing? You see a lot of this across multiple companies at the same time, which is the beauty of the consulting space. So how do you think pharma companies are really thinking about their workforce strategy as the AI part of it becomes a bigger part of the picture?
I think that's the real tension. That's the real tension. You just talked about the role of data science as an example. There are very few companies that are actually spending the time to even educate the business on how to actually ask the right question. And this is not ask the right question in the old world where it was, hey, let's ask the business question differently. It's about having different expectations on what the art of the possible really is. For example, if we stick with the life cycle planning example that you just said, business knows how to ask the right questions in terms of what's the What are the series of decisions I need to make along the useful life of an asset so that I can constantly infuse life? When should I do indication expansion planning or indication planning in general? When should I do LOE planning, and so on and so forth? But the other way of asking the question is, what decisions have we already made? What trade-off choices have we already evaluated? What conclusions have we already come to the table on, so that we don't need to ask that question all over again? Question is not being asked at the right place with the right frequency at the right leadership level, because our business leaders are not trained to ask that question. They would think that if they think of a question, it's worth enough to ask, so let's ask it. And then there's sort of spinning in terms of how many times that question gets asked. Training them on really thinking using organizational literacy, bringing institutional knowledge, is an area where workforce planning in the day and age of AI becomes different from what it used to be in the past. That's one aspect. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, in reality, most companies are not reducing headcount wholesale, but they're changing the profile of who they need. Just more judgment, less task execution, because task execution can be automated. And companies are moving down that path of automating what is known, what's more SOP driven, and let's drive that. More people who could translate between strategy and technology. The risk of having senior leaders who have never done the junior work, because AI has always done it for them, is going to become more real in the future. Because today, who are the seniors are the ones who've been juniors in the past, and they've been there, done that, so they can even sense check. They have a good sniff test sort of intrinsic
I call that
ability.
spidey sense, but yes,
Spidey sense,
actually
exactly.
the same
They
thing.
can test.
You're right. That's and that was something I wanted to make sure we touched on. Is just the growing up, if you will, in your career is going to change so dramatically. I teach folks who are just finishing up their college career and starting to work, and I think they're heading into a very different environment than the one that I would have done 20 years ago, right? That's an important part of it too. And if AI is going to start to take over some of the tasks that used to be super painful manual things like typing numbers into PowerPoint decks and stuff like that was part of your early career, what's that going to look like? How's that going to,
So the big workforce strategy question really is, how do you then develop talent in a world where the traditional pathway of learning by doing is being compressed? Everybody said, learn on the job, but now the job is being done by AI. So what do I learn therefore, right?
Yeah.
So it's happening in pockets. Now, what's happening is, from my observation, large cap pharma companies, they've now all started to build out these AI COEs or digital teams that's leading the charge, while the rest of the organization is lacking. They're like, oh, anything new is happening there. We're still doing the way we have always done things. Now, let's take marketing as an example. Most pharma marketers today, and it pains me to say so, but it's truth, they're identical to how they used to work, let's say, 10 years back. That's actually the same thing with med affairs. That's the same thing with pricing and contracting, where these functions continue to operate and they're focused on their jobs instead of how to modernize in the day and age of AI. So if you really think about a pharma company, especially a big pharma company, it looks like the tale of two cities within our clients, where there is a more smaller future fit stuff, and they're the small minority. And they are looking for relevance, because even if they innovate, it's an island of innovation. An island of innovation rarely is scalable, and the vast majority haven't really changed. So this now is becoming increasingly a topic where we start to engage directly with executives, because executives are worried about it. They don't want a tale of two cities within their own organizations. My personal posture was and is that these changes cannot happen in pockets, and they can't happen sporadically. And it definitely cannot happen without executive mandate. It cannot happen if people within the organizations have an opt-out button. That, let them do this. I'm going to opt out, and when it becomes real, I'm going to opt back in. That sort of creates a decision paralysis, where organizations will not be able to see the type of workforce transformation at the speed that is necessary.
Yeah. No, I think that's we're doing this kind of mandate feels like it's so important. And I can see that in some of the clients I have now, because they're a lot of the way that AI tools, even the most basic, let's buy some licenses for ChatGPT or Claude or whatever and start using them. That tends to come from the top down. It tends to be a CEO or a C-suite person saying, we should be really behind the times. We should get with this. But it's met typically, to your point, with a small cohort of people who are like super pumped. They've already been asking, when can I start using these tools for work? I've been using them in my personal life, and I maybe have used them in my last job, right? I just really want to get going, and I know how to do things quickly with these tools. So, this context of having a workforce that has been exposed and comfortable with AI, just more in the more basic kind of productivity tool sense of AI. Something that is so different and changing so rapidly. Like I said, I teach students at BU, and what's been, I think, very eye-opening and fascinating to me is, first off, what they can do. They can do a lot more with a lot less time, but also there's a degree of skepticism and hesitancy in young people because they've been taught for the last few years, like, absolutely do not use these tools. If you do, you'll be caught
Mhm.
cheating and you'll be kicked out. Or so they're having to unlearn a very reasonable kind of precaution that had been put in their midst. And I think every university, every high school, every junior high even probably is going to have to contend with, what are we going to do about a skill like typing, right? Used to be, oh no, you want to type things, you have to handwrite so you can learn how to write cursive or whatever. This is going to become the idea of building and creating content completely independently versus with AI. It's going to be an interesting tension as to when and how and what we do to build those muscles of judgment and critical thinking in addition to all the technology. This is this judgment question around who to do what, when, where, why. If we lose that edge, one of the things I've written about recently was like, are we at peak critical independent thought? Because now it's just too convenient to ask for help when you get to a tough problem. I think we're like, it's very existential in that sense, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. See, this is why when I see companies roll out, large pharma companies roll out tools like Claude to the entire organization, that makes me feel good because at least the first box has been checked. You're asking vast majority of the
Yeah.
workforce to modernize themselves and become a little more literate with respect to tools that exist. But then, to your point, the judgment question is the more critical one. Hopefully, in the next maybe year or so, through these tools being more available, AI would execute the tasks, and people are going to leverage Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or what have you to execute those tasks. But still, and hopefully, AI would not be able to make those contextual calls that an experienced commercial leader makes. So then the question really becomes, from a talent standpoint, how do you drive that combination of judgment with the speed element of it? But the second piece of this also is around incentivizing. How do you now make faster and more timely decisions? Because the time it takes to get to all the insights that you need has shrunk. So if the time it takes to get to an insight shrinks, what do you do with the time? You don't ask for more insights, because that is essentially going back into the hole that we actually crept out. You use the time to actually make more decisions. And yes, some of them would be wrong. Maybe, let's just say, 50% of all the decisions we make are incorrect decisions, but they're all micro decisions. They're all micro decisions. So I can learn, I can adapt, and I can change again. And now that is the big difference that I hope that the world of AI is going to drive. It's going to lead to more decisions. It's probably going to teach our pharma clients to fail more, but fail less gloriously, right?
Yes. Yes.
And that's hopefully going to start driving the change. I used to equate this back in the day to Google Maps. It shows you a path, and let's say you don't follow the path and you take a different path. What's the worst that will happen? You'll probably add 10 minutes to your drive time, let's just say. But you're still going to come back eventually to the path that you were supposed to take because you didn't follow directions. But then maybe when you took that path, maybe the tool realized, oh, you don't like paying toll. So you're always constantly going out of the highway that you have to pay toll and learn something about you. And then you constantly, but what you've done is you've actually made more decisions. And I think that's what we're trying to, hopefully in the day and age of AI, what's going to happen is decision making and rapid decision making is going to get incentivized, because the amount of time it takes to get to the insights, the amount of time it takes to actually process all the information and get what you need has shrunk. Otherwise, we'll be sitting on time not knowing what to do with it.
Yeah, and I think that's another tension, right? People are talking a lot about that. We have all this extra time. We've become more efficient. What do we do with the time? And the other thought process there is then you could potentially gather second order decisions to make. If I did X, what would be the A, B, or C? What would be the outcome of those three? Which one do I prefer? If I did Y and I have D, E, and F as outcomes, do I like E better than A, B, and C? Then I guess I should go here, right? Those more complicated decisions can be made with more iteration and more discussion, as opposed to we only finally got all the data and we can't really tell. So I think we're going to go with X, right? And you never talked about the next layer of complexity. I think that to me is really a part of where AI can help. If I'm trying to summarize a meeting, this is an example I was giving the other day. If I'm just strictly trying to read through all my notes and try to find some patterns and put some bullets on a page to say, here's some of the topics we covered today, and I spend all my time doing that, then there won't be the so what or the now what or the next step meeting. I don't get to it. But if the summary part of here's the 5 or 6 things that got talked about across this hour-long meeting or whatever is done quickly, then I can start thinking, what does that mean? Should we have the next step should be this or that? You get to the next order things a lot better. So that idea of how to bring technology and judgment together, like that's in a way that's some of what we've been talking about, why the partnership of Improzo and Guidehouse is so valuable. If you can figure out a way to kind of get the best of each of those things, right? If you can have the technology speed up your execution, but also have that headspace time to really think critically and come up with the best sort of judgment that you can bring to bear. And you can leverage all of the experience people have had where they've seen this movie before and they sort of know where it's heading, right? Like all of that combination of those two things could be the best of both in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And that's why our approach, because we stay nimble, we stay agile, and we apply our individual expertise, but we offer to the client what the client really needs, and it's core to their own core competency, is, I think, the true differentiator. Now, when I look across the industry and I look at Lilly, for example, they're very clear that they said that they look at their core competency not just in discovery and development and commercialization, but Diogo talks about it as a technology company lifting all the other pharmacos in the process. They're making their own information more open source, like an all boats rise.
Yeah.
But that's a Lilly strategy. That is not the same strategy for some other company. So if that is true, if there is indeed no one size fits all approach, and if that is going to run counter to what executive leaders and our clients truly find valuable, then the way we engage with those clients should be actually working with them to build what their core competency should look like. And in my opinion, the companies that will navigate this well are the ones that are very clear on what their unique strategic talent looks like. They're going to build that, they're going to protect that, and they have to be very honest about where their execution capability is better rented versus owned. That to me is an enterprise strategy question. It's not a brand strategy question. It's not a portfolio or an affiliate strategy question. And therefore, it's both strategic as well as how do you go about delivering to that enterprise strategy, which is where our partnership, I think, is going to be very valuable to our clients.
Yeah, no, I think that alone is something worth thinking about how to engage with. And as usual with these conversations, I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this topic. There's so much more here. But that's actually a good thing, because I think what we're planning to do is actually have a second episode where we could talk about a little bit more of the future of commercialization. This is where we are today, the tension that lives in our current environment. But what happens when we see companies, maybe we can talk some examples of where agentification and automation and all the things we've been talking about really start to be part of the commercial workflow. That to me is going to be exciting too. So I'm teaser of the fact that we want to talk about that as well, and that's coming soon. But before we do any of that, I really want to make sure that, Indraneel, you have your takeaway from the conversation we just had today.
My key takeaway, I think we talked a lot about the build versus buy question. And I think it's really a question about what you as a company want to be good at. You got to be clear on that. And then the right answer will follow. I think for any leader listening to this, my recommendation would be look at your function, look at your team, look at your next 12 to 18 months mandate, and ask this question: what if I choose not to accept the status quo, right? And be curious, because large scale impact it all starts with curiosity. When you ask yourself the question, you'll open up yourself up to a possibility of a new operating model, possibility of embedding AI into what may be frankly inconceivable to you today, and not assume that anything big or anything bold is going to take a long time, because frankly, it might not.
No, I love that. And I think that is one of the biggest changes in the speed of these things. I keep emphasizing that to people, because the companies that do really well in this kind of dynamic environment, they're not trying to just completely own every piece of the capability stack. And that idea of stepping back and looking at it as more of an orchestration problem. Where do I want to really invest and play? What do I want to be good at? And where do I think I can probably just do just as well to let someone else take that particular part and run with it, to find the right partnership, the right talent, both externally and internally, so that you have that kind of orchestra, if you will, of different things going on. I use a lot of music metaphors. That to me, that's going to become the new kind of superpower of the commercialization leadership teams, is that idea of really thinking about it as an ensemble with different strengths and different kind of benefits. You just wouldn't want to mix those up too much. You want to make sure you have a sense of what's going to happen when you put those things together. So this is like a whole other world that we're heading into in the next few years. So it's pretty exciting. So to wrap things up for today's conversation, Indraneel, where are folks going to be able to find you if they want to continue the conversation with you?
You can always find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Just search with my name, Indraneel Mukherjee, and you'll find me right there.
Awesome. And we will also, on our website, we'll have a link to your LinkedIn profile, and that way people can find you. And maybe as they're listening, they can go to the Improzo website and find you that way too. So Improzo.com, LinkedIn are definitely good channels for us both. And thank you so much for joining me today, Indraneel. It was just a genuine pleasure, and I cannot wait for our next conversation.
Likewise.
This has been the Improzone, improving life, empowering customers. Follow us and stay tuned for what's next.